Greetings, saludos. In the name of the National Latino Behavioral Health Association and the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, we welcome you. June is National Men Health Month. This month is all about encouraging the men in our life to take care of their health, and our center is happy to partner with the National Compadre Network to bring you a three-part virtual learning sessions titled El Hombre Noble, How to Engage, Embrace, and Heal Chicano Latino Males. Today is the second session titled Buscando, Hombres Buscando Balance, Working with Wonder Men. We invite you also to register for the last session, Sacred Fatherhood, that is happening Friday, June 25th, from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Dolga Michelle Zelaya. I am the program coordinator for the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center. I will be your host for today's session. Now, please allow us to share some brief instructions about the virtual learning session. A copy of today's presentation will also be available after the event. When we get to the QA portion of our session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions by clicking the QA box, and I will present your question to our moderators and panelists. We also be asking you to fill out a brief survey at the end of this event. This satisfaction evaluation is important to the work we do and provide us with the opportunity to improve our training efforts. Although we are not securing continuing education credits for this event, we plan to do for future events. A certificate of completion will be sent to you after the training. For this event also, we have closed caption available. You need to activate on your screen by clicking the live transcript button on your screen, then choose show the transcription. Next slide. Now, so let's begin. Let's start by introducing NALBA, the National Latino Behavioral Health Association. It's a nonprofit and is located in New Mexico. The mission and goal of the National Latino Behavioral Health Association is to influence the national behavioral health policy to eliminate disparities in fundings and access to service and improve the quality of service and treatment outcomes for Latino populations. Next. NALBA was established to fill a need for a unified national voice for Latino populations in the behavioral health arena and to bring attention to the great disparities that exist in the areas of access, utilization, practice-based research, and adequately trained personnel. NALBA Executive Director is Mr. Fred Sandoval. And we also provide national leadership on mental health, substance abuse concerns to Latino in the 5 major areas of focus. Targeted capacity expansion of mental health services for Latinos, Latino behavioral health evidence-based practice, legislation to increase the number of counselors, therapists, and other behavioral health practitioners, funding for co-occurring disorders on alcohol and substance abuse, opioid crisis in the Latino community, and suicide prevention. Now, allow me to introduce you the Prevention Technology Transfer Centers. Our PTTC is part of the TTC network, a multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the prevention field. The PTTC network was established in 2018 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA. The PTTC network is comprised of 10 domestic regional centers, 6 international HIV centers funded by PEPFAR, 2 national focus areas, and a network coordinating office. Together, the networks serve the 50 US states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and the Pacific Islands of Guam, American Samoa, Palau, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia, and the Mariana Islands. The International HIV ATTC PTTC serve Vietnam, South Asia, South Africa, and Ukraine. Here you are seeing the map of the US-based PTTC. Our center have a national focus for Hispanic and Latino community and the workforce that provides services to these communities. Our PTTC is staffed by Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, our program director, Ms. Priscilla Yamasi as the executive administrative assistant, and myself, Dr. Michelle Zelaya, as a program coordinator. Now it's time to introduce our moderator, Mr. Jerry Tello, and our panelists, Dr. Ricardo Carrillo and Mr. Armando Lawrence. Mr. Jerry Tello is the director of the training at National Compadres Network. Mr. Tello, over the last 40 years, has dedicated himself to the prevention and healing of individuals, families, communities, and systems by speaking to over 500,000 people and training thousands across the nation. Born from a Mexican family, Texan and Coahuiltecan roots, and raised in the South Central Compton areas of Los Angeles. Mr. Tello is an international expert in area of trauma, healing, men and boys of colors, fatherhood, family strengthening, racial justice, healing, community peace, and mobilization, and culturally based prevention and intervention issues. He is a co-founder of the National Compadres Network, established in 1988, and presently is director of the training and capacity building. He has authored a number of articles, videos, and curricula addressing the issues of fatherhood, male-child relationship, and gun violence prevention. Welcome, Mr. Tello. We also have Dr. Ricardo Carrillo, the director of Psychology Training Comprehensive Crisis Services in San Francisco, California. He is recognized as an expert witness and international consultant in the areas of family therapy, domestic violence, cross-cultural psychology, forensic psychology, and domestic violence offender. He has provided leadership in different areas: Latinos mental health, chemical dependency population. He attended to the California School of Professional Psychology in Fresno, California, and he had taught for 10 years in professional psychology school in the Bay Area. He maintains a private practice in Berkeley, California, and continues to provide professional consultation to a variety of agencies. He is the crisis intervention psychologist from San Francisco Police Department. He is a co-founder of the Latino Men Circles that is dedicated to living as a noble man and an advisory board member of the National Compadres Network. Welcome, Dr. Carrillo. And last but not least, we also have Mr. Armando Lawrence. He is the coordinator at East Los Angeles Men Talking Circle National Compadre Network. Mr. Armando Lawrence has been involved as a community advocate and practitioner for healing, cultural integrity, human and civil rights, and is an active board member of the Director Via Healthcare Clinic in East Los Angeles. He is a coordinator and participant and founding member of Los Angeles Indigenous Peoples Alliance, and since 2016 has been working with incarcerated men in the state of California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, with programs that teach positive personal development and understanding the impact of childhood trauma, and in a method to assist them in a beginning in the healing process. Dr. Ricardo Carrillo, Mr. Tello, and Mr. Armando, welcome. We're very happy to have you with us this afternoon. And Mr. Tello, the floor is all yours. You can start the presentation.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Lolka, and all of your staff for for all the coordination and everything you do to allow us to be here today. I want to just begin by thanking, the ancestors and creator and all those that are connected to us. I want to thank the audience and just acknowledge you in our traditional way. If we were in person, we would be walking around greeting each of you and acknowledging you that way. That's the way we learned really to do it. But I'm really happy today to be here with some, really close brothers of mine. I mean, we've been walking this road for a long, long time. Um, but they're also, have that the knowledge of many years of experience of not only living their own lives and the healing path that all of us have been on. And if you were on the session last week, you heard about the history of the Círculo de Hombres, the National Compadres Network that a number of us, and in fact, Dr. Carrillo and I, after working for many years in the areas of helping and trying to address some of the issues in our community, issues like domestic violence and gang violence, child abuse and just pain in communities. We figured it was time. We needed to do it ourselves and invite other like-minded men to begin addressing the wounds that men carry. And in that initial círculo, recognize that the first step of that is healing ourselves. And so we've been on that journey together. So when we talk about Hombres Buscando Balance, working with wounded men, it's not like there's wounded men off in a corner and we're working with them. It's like all of us have some wounds, some that we're still working through, that we're still carrying. But that first step, and I want to say this especially to the practitioners that are out there and the policymakers and the administrators, is that we got to do our own work first, because if not, then we develop wounded programs and wounded reflections of what we need to do, and that's part of that first step. So let's go to that first slide. I want to, if you weren't here last week, I want to just cover a couple of things that really are grounding philosophies for us. This is concept de la cultura cura. And it says, within the collective dignity, love, trust, and respect for all people exists the wisdom resources for a beautiful, harmonious tomorrow. So, and this philosophy really engenders that we all have medicine in us. We all have healing properties. We all have grandmas and familia and cultural traditions that teach us how to be. And when me as a man and we talk with other men, we have that sense of balance, that sense of sacredness in us. But often it gets covered up by the wounds and by the fears and by the struggles. And those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Next slide. But it's based on this philosophy. And there's some ancestral teachings that, when you grow up in a familia, you just live them and don't realize these teachings and how significant they are. But these four teachings, 4 directions, if you will, of being wanted and a blessing. And some of us grew up with getting those bendiciones, those blessings from our grandmas there, the second thing is that all of us had a sacred purpose. And we really believe that. And even if your journey has been one where you struggled, where it's been difficult, those teachings, those lessons along the way can be transformed into medicine. And you're going to see Dr. Carrillo and Armando Lawrence, how they have been able to transform those lessons into now the work that they're doing with men and families. And so we, as part of this, we really recognize the cultural teachings that are really important within our culture, within the essence of our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health, right? But that we need that rites of passage. We need someone to guide us. And we find that many men on the path, many young boys on the path don't have men to guide them for a whole number of reasons. But in order to heal, you need safe, compassionate places, and that's the work that we've done attempting to create that. Next slide. And so these concepts of hombre noble, a lot of people don't realize that we have concepts that go way back, that go thousands of years. Our ancestors had these teachings of what it means to be an honorable person, an honorable man. And so these teachings are here, and we use this as reference because a lot of times all people hear about Chicano, Latino men are the negative things, the stereotypical things, And next slide. And in fact, they then have a false sense of what macho really means. There's a negative sense of and it's a stereotypical sense. And if you believe that, then the choice that a man has in order to be honorable is they have to give up their culture. They have to give up who they are. They have to give up their grandmas and grandpas and all of those things. But what we recognize is that there's honorable principles de ser un macho, un hombre noble. And that's what really the healing path is going towards. Next slide. And so, but we also recognize the aspect of generational trauma, and that there's a historical sense of racism and oppression, and that is present today, that many of us carry today, the wounds of our ancestors and all that, but also we live those struggles today. And so I want to, at this time, go to full screen and introduce and invite my brother, my, compadre, colleague, really esteemed colleague, who is one of the, I consider him, in terms of that duality of life, of knowing the cultural, spiritual aspects, but also the clinical aspects, respect him as one of the leaders in this area. But he's just a good compadre. We walked this path for a long time. I want to invite first Dr. Carrillo, and then I'm going to invite Armando too, just to greet the audience and say a little bit about themselves this morning. Ricardo, bienvenidos, brother.
Okay, well, thank you, Jerry. This is an extension of what Jerry's been doing during the pandemic. He's got an ongoing podcast called Healing Generations, and he's invited all of us to speak. And my talk was called Overcoming the Shadow. And so when Jerry and I present, if you know anything about Aztec mythology, there is Quetzalcoatl, there is the god of the light and science and art and, buena gente, who gets tricked by Tezcatlipoca. And that's me. That's the dark side. That's the smoking mirror. That's the part of the duality that we live. So Jerry talks about beautiful families. And I would say to Jerry, where are these families that you talk about? These beautiful, familias that make tortillas and, make frijoles for everybody and chilito. And because I wasn't raised in that kind of family. My name is Ricardo Antonio Enrique Carrillo Chavez Santiesteban. But I thought my name was pendejo, estúpido, baboso, because I was raised in a domestically violent, chemically dependent home. My father was murdered when I was 9, he was 30, for selling narcotics in the Mission District in San Francisco. So I was raised fatherless. I'm the oldest of 5 children. My mother's from Matehuala, San Luis Potosí. My father was from Nogales, Sonora. He was a miner. After working the mines, he traveled and worked the railroads. And so he migrated from the desert and ended up in the San Francisco Bay Area and, tried to find work. The kind of work that he did wasn't available to him. So he did what other Latino immigrant men do. They try to find ways to support their family. So as a result of that, he got involved with the wrong people. And the man that raised us, that was lived with us for the short time, was not the man that was raised in his home in Arizona. And Nogales. He was a loving man. He was a caring man. He was a musician. He played for his mother. He was hardworking. He never liked school. But that's not the man I was raised with. I didn't know that man. So the Círculo called me because I was raised fatherless, and so I needed to learn, because now I had small children. My children, by the way, are now 37 and 36 years old. I have 7 grandchildren. My son has 3. My daughter has 4 children, and they have wonderful relationships, wonderful families. And so coming to the Círculo for me was a way for me to get rid of the carga, get rid of that intergenerational chemical dependency, domestic violence idea that that's all we have. This is what men do. They beat their wives, they abandon their families, they use drugs, they go to jail and prison. And, luckily for me, I had a mother who prayed for us daily. She was very Catholic, taught us about spirituality. And the Círculo, of course, we do it that way. We do it in a prayerful way. We do it in a Native American way. And we learn that we have a place in the Círculo where we can come and leave our carga in the fire so that we can be available to recognize our regalos and the regalos that everybody else has.
Thank you, Ricardo. And when Ricardo and I speak, we always talk about that duality. I talk about the tortillas and bendición from my grandma, and and he talks about the struggle. And one of the things that we realize in this path is that Ricardo now, I mean, has found that beautiful, loving family. He's because of the sacrifice, has recreated that, and so he has children and grandchildren that do know the tortillas and the bendiciones and all those blessings, and that's the path of healing, you know. And so, you know, I want to introduce my other compadre here, Armando Lawrence, who known for many years, we you know met on that path of you know social justice and action, but also cultural healing as well. And Armando is one of those brothers from the neighborhood, from the street, one of the homies that you know, that works and has the ability to really connect with those that don't want to come into treatment, don't want to go to any programs, but you know, he has the ability to really connect on that spirit to spirit level, and so is able to reach, you know, in the spirits of those that feel they can't be reached, you know. So I just want to, you know, open it up and give Armando just a little bit of time just to introduce himself and as we begin this dialogue.
Gracias. Thank you, Jerry. And buenos dias or buenas tardes, depending what part of the country you're in right now. And it's indeed an honor for me to be here with Jerry and with Dr. Ricardo and with everyone here. My full name is Armando Enrique Lawrence Jr. My father is Armando Romo Lawrence from Nacosari, Sonora, a member of the, or descendant of the Opata Indian Nation. My mother is Olivia Vargas Lawrence, born in East Los Angeles, and with my abuelos being from Zacatecas and Chihuahua, Mexico. I was born in East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights specifically, myself. You know, and if you know anything about the East Los Angeles area, it's a very marginalized community, can be very rough, some rough streets. It's an abused community. It's an oppressed community. And in that, my father struggled to make a living for us, to provide for us, things he didn't have. My father came up más o menos, more or less like an orphan in Sonora, struggling to just stay alive, survive there in his little pueblito. So as he started to do better for himself, he moved us out of East LA, out of East Los Angeles, and moved us into a more middle-class type community. But I went from a marginalized community to a community that didn't necessarily accept me because I was different. I was one of those. I was Mexican. I was from the wrong part of town. And tell you the truth, while I had confrontations with other youth and students in school, I was really made to feel pretty bad about myself by teachers that were not accepting of me, teachers that would try to explain to me why my Mexican culture was negative, why it was bad, how it would hold me back, it would not help me. Those things hurt very deeply. You know, on top of that, I was not an A student in school. If I got a C, that was a happy day for me. I was mostly a D and F student. I was a quiet kid in school, but you know what? When you're a D and F student, you tend to hang around, at least in my day, in the back of the classroom. And by the time I got to high school, I discovered the other guys that were hanging out in the back of the classroom were homies, homeboys, gang members. And they attracted me. I really found an attraction to hanging around with them, hearing their stories, the way they dealt with things. And I ended up being a gang member. I joined a gang. And one day I ran into, at a community center, ran into a social worker from UCLA, and she wanted to ask me, why did you join a gang? And I thought about a bunch of reasons. I actually was going to make up some stuff and tell her whatever I wanted to tell her, because she was this college student from UCLA, and what does she know about my community and my people? But then I got real serious. I got serio. And I said, you know why? Because my whole life I had felt rejected. I have felt hurt from that rejection. And these guys opened their arms to me. They embraced me. And that was a feeling I loved. Now, in my mind, in my head, I know that when I joined the gang, I knew that I was asking for a lot of trouble. But in that moment, being accepted felt so damn good, I wanted more of it. And so I joined the gang and I went with it. Got me into a lot of trouble. I almost died on the streets of East LA. But gracias a Dios, thanks to Creator, I'm here today. I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of experiences in the community. Lucky to have met my brother Jerry Dale and taken the teachings of our ancestors and put them in a method, in a model, in a process that we could practically use it today for healing. Not just for my healing, but the healing of many of my brothers. Men my age, younger men, boys, and las mujeres también, for the familias of my community. And so again, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mando. And you bring up a really critical aspect. If we remember one of the slides, the first slide is that sense of being wanted, the sense of being, that, and we realize that that's an essential element. I mean, in our families, that was reinforced when, you walk in a house, you gotta kiss and hug everybody. It took 30 minutes to get in the door, but that you acknowledge everybody, Yeah. And one of the things that we have found in all these years, I'm going to ask both of you to talk a little bit about this, is that especially for Chicano, Mexicano, Latino males, there's not a sense of being acknowledged or wanted. There's a sense, where's our lugar? Who are we? And many people will not understand, that aspect as being so significant, not only from a psychological point of view, but from a spiritual point of view. And to the extent that you'll go and hang out in dangerous situations and do sometimes very unhealthy things just to get that need met, And so I know that both of you have done work in many areas. And I was wondering, Dr. Carrillo, if you can begin just by talking about, some of the basis for the woundedness that we see in men, and what happened when we came to the Círculo, we felt we were going to develop programs, and when we looked in the mirror of all these other men, we realized there was some issues that we had not dealt with, some issues that that we're still having to deal with. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about, after all these years, what you've seen as some of the primary issues that wounded men struggle with that way.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things with that. Let's take what Armando talked about and that experience of feeling belonging. There's a practitioner and a psychiatrist and a researcher traveling the world right now who's offering a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma, Gabor Mate, who wrote a book with Peter Levine on the realm of hungry ghosts, the reasons why people use chemicals, dependency, why people get attracted to drugs, why people get attracted to gangs, why people get attracted to workaholism or food or whatever the situation is, because we're not loved. No tenemos lugar. We don't have a place. There's no place where we fit in. So for Latino men in this country, no tenemos lugar. So the very first thing we learned early on was that everybody had a place. No matter who you were, no matter where you came from, no matter what degree that you had or didn't have a degree, you had money, you didn't have money, you had a place. And so that's the very first healing aspect. And when we gathered for the first time, I was an arrogant, full of myself psychologist, because I was compensating for that lack of love, lack of affection that I felt I didn't have. And so we were all sitting and talking about our history and who we were and sharing our souls and our spirits. And I turned on a tape recorder and I put it in the middle of the room. And one of the men said, after he was sharing his story, I guess they didn't pay attention. I thought everyone saw me put it down there. He said, Orale, what are you doing, man? You're taping my story? I didn't give you permission. No te di permiso, carnal. Orale. So that was, and we spoke for hours after that about respeto, about permiso, about having a sense of sacredness. You know, we're sharing something very private. And I was thinking publishing and getting the word out and look at this historic event that we were having without paying attention. Pay attention. This is important. This is sacred. So the work, theoretically, what we're trying to do is teach people about sacredness and secure attachment. So if you're a practitioner, if you're a researcher, if you're a promotor, if you're a prevention specialist, I see you, I understand you, and I'm going to take care of you. If we don't convey that, we're not going to engage anybody. We can engage Latino men because we're Latino men. And the first thing we do is we put our hand out, Señor, ¿cómo está usted? Señor, ¿cómo está usted? Con ese respeto that maybe our dads never got. When we were doing domestic violence work and we were calling them domestic violence offenders and they're criminal and you got to punish them and you got to teach them and you got to treat them. No, we did something opposite. We welcomed them into the círculo. We held their hands. We had a contrato, we had a contract. You had to pay for your services, but that was part of the palabra. But it was done in a respectful way. You weren't being criminalized and you weren't being pathologized. And we weren't treating you like an antisocial person. We treated you like a man who deserved respect. So I see you, I understand you, and I'm going to take care of you, which is why Armando was so attracted to the gangs. That's our competition right now. The gangs understand that better than anybody. I see you, I understand you, and I got your back, baby. I got your back. Because that's what we're missing. We need somebody who says, I got you. And that's, if you're going to heal anybody, and Gabor Mate is saying the very same thing, inside of every human being, there is a complete, whole, healthy, vibrant human being that just needs to be loved, attended to, and cared for. And if we hold the space, that person will find their place. If you build a community so that you can deal with the trauma, the traumatized situations, because you tend to be alone and by yourself, you can sit back and see the healing happen because they're not alone anymore.
Yeah, thank you. You know, and it's so profound, Ricardo, that the way you present that, both the clinical side and the personal side, because I think that that's really that first step. You know, when we look at services and when we look at even educational systems, you know, is there a lugar? Is there a place for men? Is there a place for fathers? Is there a place for migrant fathers, for fathers that are tattooed down, fathers can't read, you know, fathers that are a little bit wounded, and because of that they're like you were, bien bruscos, and talk a little bit loud, and people thinking, well, that's aggressiveness, and no, maybe that's just insecurity that's coming out that way, you know. But and I think you ask a very profound question, you know, can you hold me, and not just hold me, but are you ready to listen to all my woundedness? Are you, and what happened that day in that first círculo, that first retiro, is, you know, one of our brothers shared that he was wounded, shared, you know, that he was sexually abused, and it shocked us all. It shocked us all because he began crying. But what happened is the spirit came in the room and we embraced him and gave him a space to be able to share all of that without shame. And unfortunately, in this society that is so focused on criminalization and on categorization, you know, one of the things that many of us men are afraid is, if we share, are you going to report me? Are you going to diagnose me? Are you going to write a report to the court that says I'm unfit to be a father now? Are you going to use it as a way to criminalize me so I can't get a job, you know? And I know, Mando, you know, you do a lot of work in this area, you know, and especially with men that have had woundedness. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that journey and some of the struggles, you know, of really embracing and and welcoming men into a place in spite of what wounds they carry.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm in the process of doing talking circles where men can come and feel trust with other men, with the other hermanos in the group, both outside and inside of prison. And I've had men come who sit there for a long time, not saying anything. And then they begin to trust, they begin to share, what's the wounds that are deep in their heart, this espinas in their corazón. And oftentimes, like Jerry says, these men carry very deep rooted pain that goes back to their childhood. I've had men I had a brother last year came into our talking circle, or maybe it was a year before because of COVID. And he sat there like for 2 months, and finally he opened his mouth and he said, "Man, I'm sorry that I haven't shared before, but I really didn't know this was a place for me." He says, "Let me put it this way. I was a gang member. I even got kicked out of my gang. I'm a reject from the rejects. So I came here and I didn't know who to trust, but I needed a place to come to." And then he began to cry. And the tears were rolling down his face. And he shared how he had been molested as a child by a family member. And that pain he carried with him everywhere he went. In the prisons, when I'm in those circles, I hear many of the same stories. I've heard horrendous stories. And where does it start? In their childhood. Horrendous things that have been done to them. Pain, trauma that they carry in their hearts. And then they come to our circle, our círculos, and they begin to learn to trust. But some of them, it takes them a heck of a long time. In the prison, some of these men, I had a brother who opened up one time about the horrible thing, his parents keeping him in a cage whenever he misbehaved, throwing food, scraps of food once a day in the cage so he can have something to eat. That happened to him up to the age of 13. And he said, "Armando, I've been in these circles 5 years before I started to open my mouth, before I felt I could trust him." He says, "Because Holmes, I'm in prison. You don't show signs of weakness."
That's right.
And I can't trust nobody. How are they going to use that information against? They might use it against me. On the yard, I could get stabbed up. My life. But here in the circle, he said it took him 5 years before he got that trust and believed, you know what? I've heard enough stories here. I believe I can share. Ricardo, I know you want to say something.
No, the bottom line is what you're saying, Armando, is I want you to take a look at the men that are here. We can hold the space. We do it. Homicides, rapes, violations, lack of acknowledgement and dignity. We can do it. I'm not so sure other people out in the world can do that. So if you're going to do this work, be sure that you're ready. Because when the person comes to you, like these men are coming to Armando, they want to know, are you the one?
I can
tell.
Thank you, Ricardo. Let me add something in there. A lot of the men in the prison that sit in the circles that where I listen to them, share. I don't trust the therapist. I don't trust the counselor.
Right.
Their notes. What are they going to do with it? We've heard of stories of what happened to men who share deep things, and then it's used against us.
That's right.
So we don't share. We don't. They still call therapists shrinks.
Right.
They don't trust the counselor. And it takes them, some of them, years to get to a point where they can trust sharing with each other in a circle, in a talking circle, in a healing circle.
I think when we look at this, there's the whole spectrum of men that we're talking about, because we're talking about, the men that you see in prison and those that have come out. We see in those that in communities that are court referred. Ricardo sees a lot of those. But then we just got dads. We got men in communities, right?
Right.
And talking about lugar, you know, sometimes we get criticized, and especially our mujeres, our families get criticized for, in spite of the men being loud and bruscos and drinking, you know, they you know, attempt to stay and with them. And I remember, you know, because as I was, you know, beginning to develop this, I was reading these things about, you know, in Mexicano culture, especially, los machos que mandan todo, and we're the ones that, you know, we're a patriarchal culture, and the men guide everything, and we're, you know, all of that, and you know, and I thought that for many years. I thought that for many years, you know, that the men que mandan everything, because my dad was a loud talking man. Bien bruto, hey, mijo, ¿qué tiene? What's the matter? You know, and even when I'd want to go out someplace, I, you know, ask my dad, ask my mom. I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna ask that. Can I go out? She says, well, wait, ask your dad first. And so, okay, well, he's not home yet. Well, wait till he gets home. You ask him. And I'm thinking, okay, my dad's the boss in the house. He told her, you know, and aquí viene my daddy, and I hear him walk in. I said, Mom, I'm gonna go ask my dad if I can go out. No, espérate, let me feed him first. What? Let me feed him first. Okay, and she goes over here, and, you know, she's making him something to eat. Didn't realize she wasn't only feeding him food, she was feeding him information también, right? And if she wanted me to go, she fed him good information about me. She didn't want him to go, me to go, say, este fregado ni está haciendo esto. And then she come, okay, enter con tu daddy, ask, and my dad was set up, right? So I went to my dad, and based on what my mom said, either he was in a good mood and said, sí, puedes salir, you know, whatever, or no, fregado niño, your mom told me this, you know. So I go ask my dad, can I go out? Well, I think so, pero you better go ask your mom. What? Wait a minute. She told me to ask you. Go ask your mom. I voy otra vez con mi mom, right? And I'm thinking, you know, hey, mom, can I go out? What's your dad says? Don't you guys talk or what? You know, didn't realize what was going on there, right? Didn't realize, and later on we figured out my mom really orchestrated everything. My mom really was the one in our household, right? That really guided everything. But the interesting thing, you know, and so later on we figured it out. I said, hey, Mom, can I go out? Go, wait till you ask your dad. Mom, we know you're gonna tell him what, so just tell us so I can start getting ready now or no, and then I'll go ask him, no más para hacerlo, you know, and no seas así, fregado niño, go ask your dad, you know. And even though we joke about it, but the interesting thing is, even though we knew that really my mom orchestrated everything, right? My mom still, and my mom knew that she orchestrated everything. Still, she gave my dad his lugar. Vente con tu daddy, right? And one of the things that we've struggled with in this field, and especially in the field of domestic violence, is, you know, in the field of domestic violence has been a movement to remove all the men, get them out, you know, kick them out. We don't need them. If they're abusive, you know, they're bad, and get them out. And one of the struggles that we've seen in familias is, especially the Latina women, they don't want the men incarcerated. They don't want him kicked out. They just want to heal him. They just want us to heal him. But the system says, well, if you report, then, you know, we're gonna report him, and now he's got to go to these programs, and now he sometimes will get incarcerated, and that struggle between the Western system of throwing us away, putting us, and we know the demographics about, especially Black and brown men, incarcerated at a higher rate, medicated at a higher rate, you know. And one of the things, you know, that we, you know, based on the request of the mujeres, as saying, how do you heal our men? How do you heal the men that now use violence? And one of the things, as much as we are very compassionate in everything we do, accountability is the first step. You know, palabra is that first step, you know. And Ricardo, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, you know, that, because, you know, we have a whole curriculum and a whole book, and we'll show the book later on you know, healing wounded men, you know, and them recovering the sacredness. I wonder if you can talk about some of that work that is so significant in healing the soul wound, because if we don't get to the soul wound, then it's just behavioral process. But, you know, you've done some amazing work in terms of working with men that are wounded and in this path.
Well, it's not very, it's very simple, and it's also very difficult. because people who are wounded really have had impaired attachments. You don't have people who are willing to really disclose and share, like Armando was saying. Can you hold a space? It takes me a long time. I got to know if I can trust you or not. So building the trust, holding the sacred space. So I treat men and women. I work crisis services for Department of Public Health in San Francisco, and I'm the CIT trained psychologist that works with the police department of San Francisco. So police, they're wounded as well, and they have a culture behind the blue line, right? So they have to do everything that they have to do. Safety first for me. And then I'll do what I need to do to protect the community. So with all of the George Floyd stuff going on, that's really a relevant issue society-wise. Do we need police or don't we need police? But what we need to do for people is to be patient. As Armando was describing, I had a Mayan man in therapy who came to therapy because his 5-year-old daughter, was going to school with his mom, with her mom, and they were on 24th and Mission Street, and a cab zipped around the corner and ran over the little girl. And so dad came to therapy 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday for weeks and said nothing. I didn't know if he spoke Spanish. I didn't know if he spoke Maya. I didn't know if he spoke Quechua. I didn't know what he spoke. He didn't speak. So we sat for weeks together. Y luego dijo, she wanted pancakes. I fixed her pancakes. And then she told me she was going to go visit her grandparents in Guatemala. And that's where we sent her body, to Guatemala. And he came 2 more times and he was done because he had a church. He belonged to a church and the men in the church. And I've got lots of vignettes like this, lots of situations. But the bottom line is we have to engage, and engaging traumatized people, whoever they are, require sensitivity, require patience. I've had women who were going to get killed in a homicide by their partner. And she came and, he let himself in the door with a backpack, with a masking tape and a gun and a taser. And he said, I'm going to kill you. And then I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill you. I want you to see me kill myself, because they had ended the relationship. And, she survived because she held him by his face. This is where the vagus nerve is. And she was able to slip out very quickly. She saved her life. He actually killed himself on her bed. So we had to help her settle. And what happens with people who are traumatized is there is a neurobiology to this. When we have been threatened, when we're on the verge of dying, when people are attacking us, whether it's a war-torn situation, gang-involved situation, domestic violence, doesn't matter. Our right side of the brain is hyper-aroused. Our occipital range, where we look at vision and process what we see, is hyper-aroused. Our left brain, where we have language and reasoning, is offline. Our frontal lobes, where we make decisions, executive decisions, is also offline. So half of your brain is on hyper aroused and half of your brain is offline. And you're working at the primitive functioning called the limbic system: fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. Most of us freeze in life-threatening situations. What do you think police are doing when somebody pulls out a cell phone, or they pull out a pen, or they see a weapon, and they either do this or they freeze, which means they can't perform at their job function. As long as we understand that, then we need to teach people to auto reflect, to learn how to breathe, to take responsibility for the palpitations, for the tension, for the shortness of breath, for the inability to process and make decisions initially, until they can get the language with somebody that they trust. You need to go get an acupuncturist. You need to get somatic therapies. You need to do breathing. You need to do meditations. We use el temezcal. We do limpias for people, which now, by the way, is now recognized by other cultures as a way to help them. So we can do soothing therapies to help people until they can develop the language to say, this is what happened to me, because they'll tell you, I can't talk about it.
Mhm. You know, beautiful, Dr. Carrillo, because you know what you shared there is something that many men go through. We have a lot of immigrant men that have seen so many things, have experienced themselves, you know, a lot of trauma themselves, but have seen their you know, partners, their friends, they're killed or tortured. We have a lot of people in Central America. We have a lot of unaccompanied minors, young men that you know, have been traumatized. They can't talk about all of that, you know. And we have mujeres that also, you know, also have been traumatized. And so because of that, then are attracted to men that are bien bruscos, that can protect them, right? But don't realize that in that protection, it's that fight or flight. So when they get triggered, they also then sometimes will react in a relationship. But if you don't understand the complexities of all of this, from the historical trauma, from the racism and oppression that goes on, then all you want to deal with is, let's deal with your abusive behavior. Right. And let's desensitize from your anger. Let's do all of that. And without understanding the implications of society's racist and oppressive ways, and then you get trained in therapy that really don't understand the significance of even sana, colita rana, si no sanas yo, you know, the sobador, the sobando, the smelling of copal, how that, all of those things are soothing. Even the smelling of a tortilla, that was very soothing for me in Compton on a Sunday morning, to smell my grandma's tortillas. It was aromatherapy. It calmed me. Mm-hmm. Music, you know, Ricardo and I are musicians. The music that, I mean, all of these things that help to control the limbic system and really relax the nervous system. All of these things, we wonder why our familias have these parties with the blaring music. Well, that in some way that's soothing, right? So you know, I know, you know, Armando, you know, that all of these things are things that you incorporate, yes, you know, with the men, you know, with the men that you're working with in Círculo, you know, and to give them a safe place so that when they walk in that lugar, they smell and feel, and all their hypersensitivity can relax at least for a couple of hours. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, and then we need to wrap up because there's some questions that we want to the audience has. Armando.
Thank you, Jerry. You know, when and where it's possible. Yes, we have certain smells going on. We burn certain medicines, hierbas, things that we can relate to, that like romero, things that maybe our abuelas used, our moms used, that the men can relate to. When we can, we try to share comida with each other, with freshly made tortillas when possible, or even when they're burnt. But you know, the biggest thing is an abrazo, just welcoming them. Mm-hmm. They are my brothers. We are each other's brothers, and we welcome each other with open arms and open hearts, to be there with each other, to listen with each other, to each other. That lugar, feeling wanted, feeling needed, not getting rejected, not being pushed out and kicked out, but making brothers feel like, I want you in the circle, brother. Carnal, hermano, please come in and sit with us. You are my brother. I don't know you well right now, but we will get to know each other. And just that, creating that spirit of brotherhood, it does wonders. It's medicine, medicina, and it works wonders with the brothers.
I think the other thing that, you know, that is part of the way that we do things is stories, telling stories, and sharing stories. And you know, I think that we are willing to share our cargas, the struggles that we've gone through. You know, I mean, Ricardo's story of how he grew up and the pain and the struggle of growing up in a domestic violent home, growing up with drugs around, growing up with the pain and the abandonment. When men hear you saying that, and you're okay, you're doing okay now, how did you get there?
Right.
A lot of times in therapy, we're taught, don't share, don't get too involved, don't cross that barrier. Well, in our cultural way, that en la que tú eres mi otro yo, you are another me, is part of that therapeutic healing. It's part of that journey. So many of the men that at one time were, if you will, referred to us for perpetrating violence, now are the helpers. They are the ones that are providing a lot of the guidance, because they, when the men say, do you feel me? Yeah, I feel you. I've been right there, and I know, and they can recognize when someone's getting agitated. At the same time, we talk about the duality. The same time is the accountability, because we are all very strong about accountability. And we know when someone's spirit, there's a whole other session that Ricardo could do about lethality. There's some men's spirit that are so broken that they can't control themselves. And if you can't control yourselves, then you need to be in a place that can be therapeutic and healing. And we need to have more places where men can be that are separated from their family, because it's not but it's a healing space. We need to create, systems in which there are spaces where men can be that are not with their relations because it's not safe, but where they can feel comfortable enough to heal. And then the reunification, because there's men that want to be back in their family after they've done the healing, and the systems a lot of times don't allow it. I'll share this story of this guy that I was speaking at a conference. He came up to me after. He says, I just got out after being locked up for 25 years. He says, and I got an hour on the yard every day. And before I went on the yard, I would pray, because, the yard is tough, man. I didn't know if I was gonna make it, so I would pray. I was so afraid. I didn't tell nobody I was afraid. I fronted up, pretended like I wasn't afraid. He says, but I'd go on the yard and pray that I just make it through that 1 hour. He says, and now I got out. And that whole 25 years, I just looking forward to seeing my kids, right? And now they're grown. He says, and finally, about 2 weeks ago, I got they gave me, I was going to see my kids, and he says, you know what? I was afraid going on the yard. He said, but I was more afraid going to see my kids.
Mm.
He says, because I was afraid they didn't want me.
Mm-hmm.
So, it shares, the level of fear and inadequacy that men that are wounded carry, and the work that we do is really trying to create that space and trying to heal those generations of wounds, but at the same time, creating a way in which men can reintegrate in a good way, those that are safe, and then put them in a role to teach that next generation in a good way. So any comments, last comments, because we're going to go to question and answer, but things that you would recommend that you think are significant regarding the things that you haven't shared before we go to the question and answers.
Yeah, but bottom line is that once you deal with the traumatic situation, people need some skill building. So, you need learn, like I came to Círculo because I had small children and I was frightened to death about passing on the same legacy my parents had passed on to me: chemical dependency, domestic violence, child abuse, abandonment, and neglect. I didn't want to do that to my kids, but I didn't know how to be a dad. Te dijo que venga, mijo. The men would say, mijo, learn how to say whatever you need to say, but with cariño. What's that? So on the slide, Jerry talks about the four values, respeto, palabra, cariño, to be available. So you how do you do that? You have to learn. You have to learn, and you have to learn how to do that with yourself first and foremost. Have some cariño for yourself, and then have some cariño for your son, and then the babies are going to teach you more about cariño than anything else. You got to start having babies, and they're there. Hey, grandpa, you're fat. Okay. So skill development.
Yeah. Armando, I wonder if you real quick can talk about that, because you run a lot of fatherhood groups with
Yes.
men that have been incarcerated before, men that didn't have dads, men. Share a little bit about the fatherhood work that is so significant that we do, that we teach. We have curriculum on fatherhood. We have curriculum on rites of passage, on working with men that have issues with violence. But can you talk a little bit about the fatherhood groups and what goes on there and what you do? I mean, it's really about skill.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. In our fatherhood group, we use some of the same things we do in Talking Circle. It's real critical that we create a connection with each other, that we connect from the corazón to the corazón, from heart to heart, that everyone is made to feel like they're welcome. And, it usually by session 3 in our fatherhood program, a lot of the men start to open up and say, I really didn't want to be here. I didn't think I was going to like this. I thought you were going to tell me how to live my life. I even had one brother the other day who told me, he says, I'm going to tell you guys the truth. My wife signed me up and I didn't know anything about it till the day of the program. And she says, I need you to jump on something on the computer. But I have never had a man who said, I don't like this. This is not for me. I have had some men say, I'm not sure I'm ready for all this, but I'm going to try. And so we try to create a safe place, a place of trust, of confidentiality. It's a círculo. It's a brotherhood, is what, as I tell the men, I'm your brother and I'm here for you, even when the program ends. Here's my number and here's where you can contact me. If I'm your brother, if I'm offering that, that's for keeps. That's forever.
That's beautiful. And I think that the skill building that Ricardo talks about and that you talk about, Armando, is very real. Because if you haven't lived living with a dad, knowing how to be loving or nurturing, or even how to be instructive without being harsh, and you don't know what that's like, what is love? I mean, but also the regular stuff that goes on in life. You have, teenagers that then, are doing things that challenge you. How do you deal with that? So those are some of the instructions that we cover. And I do want to, just as we're winding down the presentation itself, I do want to say that we work with a lot of women that are raising boys, because the interesting thing is you can have women raising boys and those attitudes, the false macho attitudes still come out in the boys, because the women convey those things. No says, Chion, ¿qué tienes? What's the matter with you? Don't be a sissy, Right. Hey, so we need to recognize it's not just the men that are conveying these messages, that the mujeres as well, and sometimes to the extent that, we find that women, of course, have had negative relationships, have had hurt relationships, especially with their dad, right? With the dad of the kid. And because of that, doesn't like the dad of the kid. And then as part of the process, when the kid acts up, the mother says, you're just like your dad. Well, he's heard her say, I don't like your dad. Your dad says, this and this. And then the comment, you're just like your dad. So we need to be careful how we transmit information. And as mujeres, it's really, really important, for us also to check the wounds that we have. And because that gets conveyed to your boys, but it also gets conveyed to the daughters, to the young girls as well, in terms of their identity. So we do a lot of mentorship, if you will. We don't call it mentorship. We're compadres. We become tios. We have rites of passage for young boys, because we recognize it's very difficult, often in this world. And in our traditional way, that's why you had the extended kinship. That's why you had tios and compadres and all of that. And that's what we're really trying to recreate, Mando, did you want to say something?
Yeah, real fast. One of the things that we that we share in our fatherhood program is that, life is sacred. Children are sacred. Abuelos, grandparents are sacred. Women are sacred. Pero los hombres también are sacred. Men are sacred. We have a sacred relationship with our children. We have a sacred path in life. And how would we live our lives if we understood ourselves that way? in our sacred relationships with one another.
That's
Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah. So I think it's time for some questions, and so I don't know if we have any in the.
Jerry, can you make sure that you post the resources? People are asking about resources.
Okay. Yeah.
And somebody had a question about self-hate. What do you do with self-hate? That's up your alley, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you. Thank you. What a wonderful conversation. It really made me think about my father and my grandfather, especially because I remember when I grew up with my grandparents and I called him Papa. He said, Papa, can you take me to some place? And he said, no, because I give my word to so-and-so that I need to be there. So palabra was so important for my grandfather, and respect. So it's so beautiful how you helped me to bring those memories. Thank you so much for that. Well, we have a few questions, and we're gonna go to Victoria Kutri and say, can you please speak more about self-hate? I saw it on the slide about generational trauma.
Yeah. So there's a whole other presentation that we we could do on a whole process, because you know what ends up happening when you live in a society that doesn't acknowledge you, and we talked about this morning all about acknowledgement, about welcoming, about you being a blessing, and Armando pointed it too, that men are not seen as sacred. We're seen as the problem. We're seen as perpetrators. We're seen as, you know, no sirven para nada, as Ricardo said. We're seen as, you know, I mean, this society, you know, men are not necessarily, you know, and especially Mexicano, Latino, immigrant men, hombre, negative things. If you look in the news, if you look in, so when young boys see that, and then they live in families with wounded men, right? Because sometimes you have a father that's wounded, but then you say, pues that's the way all Mexicanos are. That's the way all Latinos. That's the way all Dominicanos are. That's the way all Puerto Ricanos, así son los hombres, you know, and that's not the truth. But when you are made to believe that, then after a while, you don't like yourself, right? And the self-hate then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when you do something wrong, then you say, it's because of my culture, it's because of my heritage, because I'm a man from that culture. And when you start hating yourself, that pain is so deep that then what you do is you then can rely on addictive behaviors, drinking, getting high, just to try and quell it. It doesn't go away, you know. So what Armando and Ricardo were talking about is, how do we transform that? And we first of all have to understand, and as both of them said, is that we as men also have a sacredness. We as men also have a sense of dignity, but we have to live it, and we have to learn how to live it. And so part of this is undoing some of that false stories and sticky notes of que no sirves para nada, que eres esto. You need to take that off and begin then recultivating who we are. Sometimes it means you have to address the wounds, right? You have to do the wound. You have to you know, address the wounds, and then commit to a long-term journey. I mean, we've been on this journey for a long time. We're still dealing with our wounds. We still, even as professional and as competent as we are, we still walk in places where people just see us and look at us the same way, and it triggers everything, you know. So we have to be ready to deal with all of these things that way. But there's a whole process that we go through, and within our fatherhood programs and within our círculos and within our rites of passage, those, you know, the ones that we train on, those are things that the whole sense of self-hate is a major thing that we look at to transform.
Perfect, thank you. We have the next question, and it is from Mr. Benito Guijarro. He say, how do you deal with losing and transitioning out of a relationship that did not serve you in your journey? For example, friendships that revolve around substance use, and machismo, but also based in love and respect. How do we make friendship and relations without trying to change them?
Ricardo, you wanna?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood the question. Say that again.
He say, how do you deal with losing and transition out of relationships that did not serve you in your journey. For example, friendship that revolve around substance use and machismo, but also based in love and respect.
Well, you know, chemical dependency relationships, dysfunctional relationships. I'm gonna share something with you all. If you all want to help yourself in relationships, everybody get a copy of Jerry's book, Recovering Your Sacredness. I'm gonna get rich. You know, I'm gonna get rich. I'm gonna get rich by teaching women and men to stop picking the same kind of guy. Stop doing it. Stop picking the same dysfunctional, violent, machista guy. My mother married the same guy 3 times. My father was murdered and she kept marrying the same kind of guy. Mejor sola que mal acompañada, Mom. Mejor sola que mal acompañada. So, you know, when she was 60, then finally she got in. She lived till she was 80, 84. But the bottom line is this. Bottom line is this. We have to value ourselves. What is our value? Who are we? And then what kind of person do we want? What kind of companion do we want to have with us? And you have to learn how to, you know, take care of your own stuff first and foremost. And then if you value yourself, then when you start relating to other people that don't have that dysfunction, don't have that violence, don't have that controlling kind of attitude, then how do they add to you? How do they help you so that you have a nice relationship about being with somebody in companionship? And that really stems from learning who it is that you are and valuing who it is that you want to be. You need to go to counseling, maybe you need to do some therapy, but you need a circle of friends that also value you as well.
And I think additionally from a personal and familial and cultural point of view, we have to decolonize ourselves. We think that drinking is part of everything, that, you know, that you got to have a drink with it. Who said that? I mean, that's part of your culture. It's not part of our culture. It's part of what's been imposed on us. So many of us in our círculo, when we have parties, when we have things, there's no alcohol at all.
Right.
And yet you have people that say, hey, what kind of party is this? Well, you know, it's for my kids, man. If you want to come, I say yes, right? And of course that challenges the family norm because they're so used to that process, right? But one of the reasons why in many of our families there's so much drinking is because we haven't dealt with the trauma. And so when you leave the alcohol out, it's difficult for us to communicate because we don't know, you know, and so it is a process. I'll say that Ricardo's children, my children, can sit without drinking and converse and have a good time and have a fun party, but it's taken generations to get there. And so, you know, with camaradas, I got friends that drink and hey, let's go out and drink. Now, dude, I don't do that. You know, I don't do that. I'll hang with you, but I'm not gonna drink. Oh, well, you're whipped, man, just because you're white. Yeah, maybe I'm whipped, whatever. I don't care. I don't do that. You know, that's not what I do, man. You know, and it's amazing when you really honor yourself and begin then to do honoring behaviors. You know, I see that as very much loving my culture, loving my people, you know, really incorporating those behaviors. But we have to realize that those are some of the things we need to do if we want the next generation to have less pain.
Thank you. And I want to thank you also all the participants. The chat is full of comments. Thank you so much for all the questions, comments. You are amazing. So the next question is for David Nischel. Dice, muchísimas gracias for the medicine shared today. Could you folks talk a little bit more about the importance of reconnecting our young men, adult men, with our indigenous ancestral practices? I grew up in San Francisco in a mestizo family, and I struggled in my identity until I reconnect with ancestral roots to Nahua and Xinca communities in Guatemala.
Who wants to take this? Armando, Ricardo, I can take over. Armando, you want to talk a little bit about the indigenous roots and the importance?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about it. You know, so a lot of us in the Latino community might also self-identify as Chicano, Mexicano, Mexican-American, other communities. And a lot of us were colonized. You know, we were taught to reject the indigenous side of ourselves, you know, and so some of the work that we've done, and individually we have done this, and also as a circle, as a group, we do this. We reintegrate some of the indigenous practices of our ancestors. When we gather in a círculo, we burn sage, we burn copal, we burn the medicines that our ancestors burn, those things that help to connect us, to help us with the limpia, to cleanse us. And we follow that medicine and those teachings, and we reintegrate them back into our familias. But look, I know people who are, what's the street term? They're almost Nazi about it. They want to decolonize themselves so much, they get real rigid about wanting to practice only indigenous things. And it sometimes creates difficulties with the familia, with the parents, with brothers and sisters, primos. And what I love about some of the ways that Jerry teaches is that, you know, we're already practicing many indigenous things that maybe we didn't think about it that way, that we were conscious about it. Having familia extendida. I mean, like me, I grew up with my tios and tias, my abuelos. So do they in indigenous communities, in traditional communities. We still carry a number of those things in us, our valores. Learning to live in balance between my heart and my mind, cara y corazón, en balance. You know, in this society, we're taught what? In a colonized society, we're taught only think with your head, only come from the brain, talking head society. What do you think when I said I was rejected by teachers when I was in grammar school? What were they telling me? Armando, to succeed in this society, I'm sorry, it's an Anglo-dominated society, and you're going to have to stop learning to live in your heart. You're going to have to leave that behind. So there's simple practices that we can do that our familias are already doing it. We just have to become more conscious of it and make that, integrate that, and make that a part of our lives.
Yeah. You know, I think the other thing is when I grew up, you know, there was a bendición, there was a lot of prayer, there was limpias, there was all kinds of things. And my mom says, my grandma would say, pero don't tell nobody at school, and don't tell the priest, you know, porque van a pensar, you know, and now years later, we call it holistic health, you know, and now there's a whole market for holistic health and breathing and prayer and relaxation and using of herbs. A lot of our families did that. A lot of our families use hierbas, and you understood the sense of using herbal teas and walking and you know, all of these things, meditation, all of those things are part of who we are and they're part of our health, you know. And so in your culture, if you have those ways, it's beautiful, because we talk about generational trauma. There's also generational medicine and generational memory, you know, that is really important. And if we can use those ways, whatever part of your culture that is, and integrate them, that can help you to feel settled, to feel calm, and to really heal those wounds, then those are the ways you should integrate. And they're different based on different people's experience.
Bottom line is you got to learn. You got to go back to your familia. Where do you come from? ¿De dónde vienes? ¿Quién eres? Are you Yaqui? Are you Tarahumara? Are you Huichol? Are you Apache? Are you Cuauhtecan? We've been honored to be part of the Cuauhtecan Nation. You know, Jerry and I are part of the nation now, Mission Indians. My family was raised Yaqui, also Mission Indians. And so we go back and try to find out who's the, we have a compadre, Samuelín Martinez, ancestry. Ancestry, the tree. Learn who your ancestry is. And then what part of the traditions are yours, what lenguaje is yours, and what gets passed on. And we've learned to develop our own traditions también. I have a blanket ceremony that I do that I learned from Jerry. So when I have a newborn come in, all of us circle around, we have a blanket that's going to be his blanket, and we hold the child inside the blanket, and everybody passes the palabra around how they're going to hold that boy or girl as they grow up. Very simple. Mm-hmm. Now that's nuestra tradición de los Carrillos Chávez.
Thank you, Dr. Carrillo. This is amazing, because one of the questions that I have is, for example, why is it so difficult for prevention programs to engage and retain Hispanic and Latino males. So you have been giving us golden nuggets, like feeling wanted, feeling needed, feeling respect, have abrazos, but also provide the space to heal, that the men can develop the language to express their pain. That is so beautiful. So thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. I'm very sorry that we are not going to be able to address every question that we have in the chat, but we want to go to the last question. And this is for Armando. Barco Ibarra is say, Armando, do you use an evidence-based curriculum? This I only ask because when applying for fundings, it's a requirement that to have evidence-based practice.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
They want to know if you use evidence-based practice, Mando.
Evidence-based practice. My evidence is my life. My evidence is the collective experience of our Círculo, our National Compadres Network, and many other familias and men and the men I work with is my evidence-based practice in my fatherhood groups, in my Círculos in the present. Let me share something real quick. I and Jerry were at a conference about 2-3 years ago, and it was dealing with gangs in Los Angeles, and the guest speaker was late. So they asked one of their scientists, who was one of the men who developed evidence-based in this country, and he got up to speak to fill in the time. And he says, I'm a boring speaker because I'm an egghead. I'm very intellectual, but I have something I want to share with you guys. He says, we just discovered that evidence-based really doesn't mean anything. He said, I'm sorry to tell you guys that, but he says evidence-based is based on paradigms. So how's that evidence-based? And he shocked everybody in the crowd. Yeah. So I went and told Jerry that, and Jerry says, well, we just got to go back with what we know, with the evidence that we have in our lives, in the lives of the people we work with, in the communities we come from. So that little bit I want to share on that.
So let me
sharing your personal stories and it's important also, have it very powerful.
Dolka, let me just give me 30 seconds. At the same time, our people are so brilliant that we know science and we know research and we all know all of that. So we have been able to develop methodologies and we do have curriculum that's evidence-based, but that's not the reason why it works. The only reason why we did the evidence-based is to satisfy the funders and the researcher, but we shouldn't have to do that anymore. Our people are here. We have evidence of what works, and So I'd like to show the books. If you could, we can go to the slide where the resources are. And Ricardo mentioned the podcast. And we have a podcast that we're doing that, if you want more, there's a lot of wonderful speakers that are related there. And then, so the Healing Generations podcast, this is a book that I published that you can get on Amazon or whatever, Recovering Your Sacredness. And let's go to the last slide in terms of the other books that Ricardo and I, so this book, Family Violence and Men of Color, Healing the Wounded Male Spirit, that we did a number of years ago. And then Cultura Bienestar, that has a lot of interventions and insights into how do we do culturally based healing, So I really want to just, with that, acknowledge the tremendous work that goes on. Dr. Carrillo continues to do amazing work. Armando Lawrence, who does that group, and you saw Ozzy last week, they run that men's circle, but we have now círculos virtually as well. They're all across the country. And then you're going to see some other hombres next week. I invite you next week to really sit in about fatherhood. I wanted to say happy Father's Day to all the hombres. Happy Tata's Day to all the grandfathers. Those that are doing wonderful jobs, and those that are on their path. Those that are still struggling, don't give up. Don't give up. Your children need you. Your grandchildren need you, right? And just want to thank all of you that way. And I'll pass it back to Dolka.
Thank you so much again. And I just want to highlight that Dr. Ricardo said that all the curriculums are evidence-based practice, just for your information. Also, here is for the invitation for our next session. Session 3, Sacred Fatherhood. Please take a moment to register for that session. I want to make sure that we didn't have the opportunity to answer all the questions, all the comments in the chat. We're gonna make sure that we have a copy, and we're going to email those, try to answer the questions via email. So thank you so much for all the participants. Next slide, please. Here is some more resources available for that are free, and some videos that we record to highlight June's Mental Health Month. And it's in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. Here is the contact information for our center. You can contact us at any time. Also, we want to invite you to our next 2021 National Latino Behavioral Health Virtual Conference, Envisioning Latino Behavioral Health Equity in the Next Decade. This one is going to happen September 16 to the 17th, and we are preparing like 18 workshops, 3 keynote speakers, exhibits, awards, fun games, and NAIDEC CEs, and also we want to invite you to submit your proposal. It's open until June 25th. So please submit your proposal for our Hispanic and Latino conference. We're looking for proposals in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. So visit our website. And now is time for our evaluation. So after everyone will be redirected to a different page to complete the evaluation. Please remember that this is very important to us. I want to thank again Dr. Ricardo Carrillo, Mr. Armando Lawrence, Mr. Jerry Tello, and all our team for supporting us with this amazing conversation this afternoon. So thank you so much. Thank you again for joining our event, Hombres Buscando Balance, working with wounded men. Thank you, gracias, and obrigado.
Tlazocamatli.
Tlazocamatli. Aho.
Thank you. A blessed day.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. Feliz Día del Padre.
Feliz Día del Padre.